A young musician was preparing for their recital in a few months' time, and as the day came, there was a packed-out hall of family and friends and people eager to see this young musician play in this recital. And as they got to the night, they entered onto the hall and the room was full. And they were nervous, you know, that butterfly feeling. And they sat down at the piano, and as the kind of shakes kind of eased out, they began to play. And there was moments of passion and there was moments of quietness. And they kept going through these songs and they kind of produced all this that they had practiced and rehearsed for. And as they got to the end of their closing song, the few notes finished on the piano and there was just stillness in the room. And then within a moment, you hear that creak of the chairs fold back and people begin to stand to their feet and rapturous applause happens and they're cheering and they're jeering and it's amazing and there's elation in the room. Yet the young musician doesn't move. They're scanning the room and silent, not smiling, and they're looking and they're fixated up to the top right-hand corner of this hall. And suddenly, people notice that there's an older gentleman just sat in the top right corner, and he hasn't stood yet. And after a moment passes, he stands, and he joins in, and a smile hits his face, and he begins to clap. And so the young musician steps out from the stool and stands forward, takes a bow, receives the applause. And when questioned later, and someone said, what happened there? What was that moment of pausing? The young musician said, it didn't matter what everybody else thought in this hall. I was waiting for my teacher. For only they knew if my music was truly worthy. I never played a big recital to a hall, but I have played the piano for a couple of years. And I followed in my brother's footsteps playing jazz piano, did a couple of grades, some groovy tunes. I didn't really want to do classical. And grades 1 and 2 went pretty well, pretty swimmingly, right? Like I kind of passed them. And our examinations would be on always a midweek morning at the Quaker Meeting House in Selly Oak, a very eerie place, I must admit. And I would walk into this really isolated room with a piano and an austere-looking teacher like peering over their spectacles, absolutely bricking it. And I would sit down and I would take my exam and then I would leave, and it would be a little bit time later when you receive through the post how you got on in your grades. So it went well to begin with, but then I hit grade 3. And it went downhill from there. Truth is, I didn't really practice. FIFA took a little bit too much time. I was interested in girls, I think, by that point, and it just kind of went downhill. And obviously, I was devastated. And I was like, oh, what am I going to do? And I got it through the post, but I was eager to get to my next Monday's lesson because I had a really kind and compassionate teacher called Nick. And as I got to the lesson, I went in and kind of sat down because I knew that whether I passed or failed in that Quaker meeting hall, it didn't really matter. What mattered was, did Nick think that I could get up and go again? Did he think I could pass? Because his opinion, my relationship with him, his voice was the one that mattered the most. And I wonder if you've had one of those relationships. Maybe you are that person, but maybe you can recall a teacher. Maybe there was a teacher going through your studies at school or a lecture at university, and you knew that when they were in your corner, like their voice mattered the most on the essay you wrote, on the assignment you did. Perhaps it's a parent. Maybe you've got a parent whose their voice and their opinion is the ultimate kind of one that you turn to and you cherish that above everything else. Or perhaps it's a best friend who, even when you know you got one of those friends when you do something really bang average, but they think it's the best thing since sliced bread. Like they're really good friends, right? Like you do average things and they think you're the best thing in the world. Because we all need those relationships. They're really, really important. And we have been in a teaching series called I'll Be There For You. Over the last number of weeks. If you haven't been around, it was a bit of an ode to friends and this idea that we all need community. And we've wrestled with some big topics, some complex, some knotty things. We looked at questions like, what if rejection might be a gift? Is honesty really the best policy? Big one, do I belong here? And last week, Harvey covered, do perfect friendships exist? And I imagine you'll agree, irrespective of temperament or personality style, that we do all need people. We need each other, we need community. But maybe you relate to one of these categories more than the other. Maybe you're more extroverted. And therefore, this is kind of what fits for you. Perhaps it's this, that community fills my energy tank. Being around people reminds me I'm not alone. Or perhaps secondly, I need people, otherwise who's going to laugh at my jokes in real time? Maybe you're that extrovert and you're like, I just need people to make me feel funny. And then lastly, without people around, I start narrating my life out loud and it gets weird. Seeing those people who they just keep talking, they're talking about what's going on in their life. Maybe you respond to that a bit more, but you still need people. Or perhaps you're more introverted. You need a bit more time on your own to recharge. Even though I recharge alone, I still need others to walk alongside me. There's still a need there. Or this is my personal favourite. I need people, just preferably one at a time and not before coffee. Once I've had my coffee and then one at a time. My wife doesn't like that one. She wants to talk first thing in the morning. And then lastly, even introverts like me need friends. We just text them instead of calling. You know, like when a friend's calling, if you're a bit introvert and you're like, oh, I won't answer, so you just text back. And they're like, no, please pick up the phone. It's that kind of thing. But we all need people. We all need relationships. That's really, really important. Although there is a thing called an ambivert, not to be confused with an amphibian or something strange like that, but it's kind of like a combination of the two, and you kind of get your energy from both people and recharge alone. I think I find myself in there sometimes. But however, what about when that idea of I'll be there for you doesn't cut it? What about when you said you'll be there for me and it's just too much? The stuff that's going on in my life, and is it fair of me to ask that you would carry that and solve that and journey with that? And that's not, don't mishear me, that's not me saying that we don't desire to and have the intention to walk alongside one another and support each other, and community is really important. But what happens when the grief is just too much for another person to handle? What happens when the stuff inside you and I is just too complicated? And we need friendships and we need relationships, but actually that to be changed, that to be healed, that to be transformed, I don't know if can you put that on another person? Can you expect that they would do that? Is it really true that you can say in a relationship, whether a romantic one or a friendship one, like, you complete me? Really? Like, that's a lot, right? That's a lot of pressure on other people. That's a lot of pressure on me. I don't think I'd do that. I know Sophie, my wife, she loves me, but I get it wrong all the time, and I'm trying to do that. And I don't know that I complete her in those ways. And as some of you will know it to be true, and as Leon has alluded to, the last couple of weeks, and particularly the last couple of days, for us as a church, have been very sad. We're mourning the loss of loved ones, of friends, of family, of people who we cherished. And so what do you do with that? We're going to desire as a church, and if you're new to us, if you're just kind of new to faith, and we hope that you find that answer to do I belong here to be true, and we will endeavor always to be community, to support one another. But I wonder if there's just some stuff that's too much for us to do. And it's likely that then, if you're watching online or if you're here in the room, that you may be feeling that question, that tension of, well then, I'm kind of showing up to church because really I'm hoping, will God be enough? Is God enough? Will God be there for me? That's why we go on the faith journey, right? It's why I have for a number of years. Maybe you're here for the first time or you're new, and maybe one of the reasons is you're coming to check out church, but I wonder if there's that deep desire to say, will Jesus be there for me? You will talk about it, you sing the songs. Will God be there for me? And the good news is that you're not alone in that. We're not alone. The question that has been the ache of many human beings has been around for a long, long time. And I want to show you the story of a man called Bartimaeus, who I think he knew he needed people, but at the same time, he wanted to answer that question with great confidence of, will God be there for me? So, we're going to jump into something of the Bible. We're going to look at one of the pieces of literature called the Gospel of Mark. And it's one of four gospels, one of four accounts of the life of Jesus. Mark is our author, but Mark is reporting the eyewitness experience of Peter. Peter is one of the apostles. So when we're looking at these stories, actually you can imagine this was Peter who was kind of taking this all in, and he's reported it back as well. And at this stage in time, as we jump into this story and we look at Bartimaeus and Jesus, the jury is still out as to whether everybody thinks that Jesus is God. We don't read these things thinking that everyone's a Christian. Actually, far from it. There are crowds around. There are people on the periphery. There's Bartimaeus, and they're all still trying to figure out, like you and I, maybe, or you're trying to answer that question, is Jesus really the Son of God? That is a tension that definitely exists in this. So we're going to read from Mark chapter 10, verse 46 to 52, reading from the NIV. Then they came to Jericho. And as Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, there we notice different groups of people, were leaving the city. A blind man, Bartimaeus, which means son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. It tells us something about Bartimaeus. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Many rebuked him. People in the crowd were telling him to be quiet and told him to be quiet, but he shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Now, just to clarify, this might be a bit confusing because Jesus' dad wasn't David. It was Joseph, or it was God. So let's get up this here before we get confused about who Jesus' dad was. When Bartimaeus is saying, "Son of David," he's actually stating the claim that Jesus is the Messiah, the rescuer. He's not just got mixed up about who his dad is and got a little bit confused. He's actually saying, "Jesus, I think you are God, and I'm going to give you that title." You see, David was a king in the nation and the history of Israel. And through prophetic foretelling texts throughout their history, they said, and God said to his people, the Messiah, the rescuer, the one who's going to sort out this problem with humanity will come from the family of David. So it's a short-term way, it's like a shorthand way of Bartimaeus saying, "Jesus, the one from the line of David, the one that they spoke about, I think that's you." So he's already bestowing on him, he's coming to him with that kind of posture. Let's keep reading. Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." So they called to the blind man, "Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you." Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. "Mark, why are you telling us that he threw his cloak aside? Was it because he had another night jacket in the back? Was it because he wasn't sure what to do?" No, this is significant. So Bartimaeus' cloak was what would have been spread on the floor to receive money as a beggar. It had been the thing that he would have banked his life upon that was going to produce flourishing, that was going to enable him to live. It was his means, it was a thing he had his hope in. So actually, when the invitation of Jesus comes to Bartimaeus and he says, "Call him," he is willing to give up everything for the call of Jesus. He's willing to give up that which was most precious to him, to throw it to the side, to attend to what Jesus had to say. So Bartimaeus throws it to the side, and then we keep reading it. And Jesus says this, "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked him. The blind man said, "Rabbi, teacher," that means, "I want to see." "Go," said Jesus. "Your faith has healed you." Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. I think this is balmy. If he is God, who fashioned the stars in the sky, who knows every hair on people's heads, who knows all the animals on land and the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, would he have not known how obvious Bartimaeus' need was? Would he have not noticed that there was a blind man who was begging in front of him, yet he asks him a question? He knew his needs, but he asked him a question. We're going to come to that in a few moments' time. Bartimaeus here had an experience that I think lived up to the hope of him finding out if Jesus said, "I'll be there for you." I think he experienced that Jesus said, "I'll be present, I'll meet you." And I want to unpack just two thoughts for you this morning, wherever you're at on your faith journey, that will give you confidence that God is there for you. The first one is this: is that Jesus, he doesn't get distracted. He doesn't get distracted. Could you imagine being Bartimaeus and all of the noise? We were told there was the crowd, there was the disciples, there was the hustle and bustle. It was a traveling road in and out of a city. If you imagine kind of walking along the Hagley Road all the way to Birmingham, you'd know that it would be pretty noisy, right? Even if there weren't any cars. And Bartimaeus is sat here and he's experiencing all of this noise, but the decibel level doesn't distract from Bartimaeus calling out to Jesus. Well, why? Like, there were things that were loud. Why? How did Jesus hear through that? Because Jesus was tuned in to the cry for help. The chatter of the crowd, the noise of other things would have been loud, but the God that we see in the person of Jesus, he hears through this stuff, and he hears Bartimaeus because he's tuned into that, not the other periphery of stuff. And there will be things in your life that feel loud. The grief is loud. The fear is loud. The pain is loud. And we may think God can't hear. God doesn't notice me above the noise of this stuff in my life. I want to tell you today that he does, because he's a God that is tuned in to a cry for help. He's a God that is tuned in to needs. And he hears through those things. And they're not too loud. And we feel like they're loud in our lives, right? They're there, they're in the way. Confusion about our faith sometimes. Devastation about things relationally. It feels like noise. It feels like loud things. But God hears through it because he's tuned in to those who ask for help. The second thing is that Jesus isn't distracted by the demands of others. The crowd had their own agenda, maybe even the disciples. There was a lot going on here. We even read, and it says here that the crowd tell Bartimaeus to be quiet. Some of them were nervous, according to kind of Bible scholars, that actually was going to cause too much of a commotion, that actually Bartimaeus shouting and getting really intent on calling for Jesus was going to attract unwanted attention. But we simply see here that Jesus can tend to the needs of Bartimaeus and account for others as well. And it's the same for you and I. That the demands of other people, you may think, oh, God's busy with those people over there. Or, those ones that attend church, like the ones that behave well, he's got more time for them than he does for me. That's not true. We see that Jesus is able to tend to the needs of Bartimaeus in the midst of stuff going on with other people. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Bruce Almighty. Where this guy, Jim Carrey, he ends up somehow becoming God for a day. I like the bit when he parts the red soup in the diner. That's pretty cool. And there's a moment which is really interesting, and it's actually such a fallacy. It paints God in a wrong way, where Jim Carrey sat at his computer, and he's going to check all the prayers from people, people like me and you. And he refreshes his screen, and he gets, let me get this right, 1,527,503 emails of prayer requests. So he does what he does, and he kind of types away, gets a good strong cup of coffee, and he's like, yes, answering all these prayers. And then he thinks, I've made a dent in the prayers. Great, I've tended to the needs of everybody. And then he refreshes the page, and now he has 3 million prayer requests. And it's doubled, and it's gone more. And it kind of paints this wrong picture that God isn't able to handle all of the prayer requests of people. But if it's true that he is holy, that he's powerful, that he fashioned the sky and humanity and you and me, then he can tend to your needs as well as the person sat next to you or with you online as well. And the other thing that didn't distract Jesus in this moment was the destination didn't distract him. Well, as he was leaving Jericho, the nature of the narrative beforehand in the Gospel of Mark tells us that he was heading to Jerusalem. So he kind of had it in his Google Maps, he had it in his Apple Maps, like he had the destination, the pin was there. And so Jesus and his disciples, they're traveling along this road, and Bartimaeus kind of seems as a bit of an inconvenience. He makes him stop. But we have to recognize here and discover that actually Jesus' destination was not as important as his purpose. And his purpose was to come for people like Bartimaeus. So in no way was actually the destination a distraction for Jesus, because he came for people like Bartimaeus. And the same is true for you and me. You may think that it's too far gone in your life to receive God, to know Jesus. That's not true. You may think, you know what, he's gone down the road, he's gone over the roundabout, he's a little bit further ahead, he's nearer that other thing, that other situation. You have to know today that God would stop and did in the person of Jesus to meet with you wherever you're at in your life. You are not too far gone. Your situation is not too far gone. The circumstances are not too far gone. He's not down the road looking over his shoulder and you're like, oh, I've missed my opportunity. Today and every day is an opportunity because he's not distracted by the destination. The second idea that I noticed within Bartimaeus that I think maybe hopefully will encourage you today is that he wants to do more than fix Bartimaeus. He wants to do more than fix him. As I alluded to earlier, we see that Jesus asks a question. I don't know if you can say it, but I think Jesus, this is ridiculous. I'm like, really, Jesus? Asking a question? It's as obvious and silly as one of those questions when you go to a Toby Carvery and the person asks you for a Yorkshire pudding. You're like, come on. I want a Yorkshire pudding. You don't need to ask that kind of question. In the same way, Jesus is asking a question that's like, Jesus, what are you up to here? You're asking Bartimaeus, who's a blind man, he's a beggar, he has nothing. What do you want me to do for you? You see, Jesus is interesting throughout what we have of the Gospels. Questions seem to be his thing. It'd be really good on a TV show, I don't know what some of those TV shows are now, I can't think of it. Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Maybe he'd be a good host for that. He asks a lot of questions. It's recorded that Jesus was asked around 183 questions, and he answered less than a handful. And instead, he asked 307. He asked 307 questions, and he barely answered any. Why? I think he asked Bartimaeus a question because it mattered to Jesus what Bartimaeus had to say. Because it wasn't just a case of, Bartimaeus, I see your need and I'm just going to solve that. But it mattered to him what Bartimaeus had to say. His voice mattered. Him identifying his need and where he was at mattered to Jesus. Him being able to speak to what it was in the depths of his life mattered to Jesus, because Bartimaeus was a person, not a problem. Bartimaeus was one that was stood in front of God and he was valuable. He was there in front of Jesus, and it mattered more that he didn't just solve what was going on in him, but that he bestowed value and dignity and honor. And it's the same for you and me. You are a person, if you didn't know, not a problem. And God doesn't just want to come in the person of Jesus and just fix things in you and walk away. He wants to hear what you have to say. Your voice matters, where you are at, what is going on in you. When sometimes we think that God can't handle the confusion, the doubt, the grief, the devastation, the sadness, the pain, he absolutely can. He would love when you tell him that it's what's going on. Could it be true that Jesus is willing to ask you and I that question? What do you want me to do for you? Because your voice matters, because he wants to do more than to fix. And we therefore see that within the wanting to do more than fix, he doesn't just ask a question, he relates to Bartimaeus. To relate means to connect, to link, to understand. This is a God we're talking about. When he says, I'll be there for you, he doesn't just want to fix those things in our life, but he says, I want to relate to you. I want to understand you. I want to know where you're at. I want to make a connection with you, that you would have confidence that I am with you, that whether you're feeling good or bad or somewhere in between, whether life is great or not great, that you would know he is there with you. Jesus listened and responded to Bartimaeus. And Jesus listens and responds to you and I. And I appreciate if you're not a person of faith that can just feel like a bit of maybe a label, and it kind of is like, okay, well, how does that even work? And in a moment, I'm going to give you an opportunity to speak to God. Maybe that's something you're familiar with, you're comfortable with. But as easy as it was for Bartimaeus just to shout out in his help and his cry to Jesus, you and I are invited to do the same. That God says, I'll be there for you. And often it's us who then just have to be willing to allow that to be true and to say something to him and to speak to him and to move towards God in the way that he has moved towards us. Let me close with this in a moment. Bartimaeus walked away that day with an increased confidence that the most important relationship to him was that with Jesus, with God. God had heard his help. He was not distracted. And he had the opportunity to speak to him. Surely, like the crowd could have helped Bartimaeus, of course. And he needed that relationally. Actually, he was probably able to integrate back into society. That was the way Jesus worked. Could the disciples have befriended him? Absolutely. But could anybody else be there for him like Jesus? I don't think so. What about you? You'll have friends, you'll have relationships, you'll have other people, but can anybody else heal you? Can anybody else restore you? Can anyone else rescue you? Can anyone else pick you up, place you on your feet and set you on the trajectory of a new life? I know for me that that's only Jesus. And you may need to know today in confidence that even as what we're facing as a church, that Jesus says, I'll be there for you. That he's not deterred by what we're feeling or what we're processing right now, but he's there for you. And he hears it and he's tuned into those cries for help. And if you're new to faith, I think this is hopefully gives you some confidence that you can do the same. If you're watching online, if you're here in the room. And there's a couple of steps you may want to take. Like when it gets to Monday tomorrow, it's a bit like, what do we do with some of what we've heard? What do we do with when I was at church and knowing how to put that into my life? It's important we learn how to practice what we hear, right? If you're new to faith, I'd really encourage you to come and check out the Alpha course. I'm a little biased because I run it with a wonderful team, but it's a really great space. And you can head to the connection point afterwards and you can ask them and find out a bit more. And even, hey, I won't be offended if you came to night one and never come back. You can come and get free dinner. It's really good. The sausage and mash is particularly good. Come and check out Alpha. If you're a follower of Jesus, you're a person of faith, go to solid ground if you can make it and it works for your season of life. Go and find out what it means to receive the love of God more and then to love him in return and to live a life close to God and to Jesus and what he wants to have and do in your life as well. Here's how we're going to land today. I want you to imagine that you're like Bartimaeus. I don't know where you're at in your life, whether things are going well, whether you're surprised to even find yourself in church today, whether you're watching online and things are particularly difficult. But we're going to take a moment. I'm going to join you because I want you to imagine that Jesus is asking you, what do you want me to do for you? And you get to respond. You don't have to. I'm not going to make you. You can sit in silence if you like. But could you imagine what it could feel like to speak to the God of all creation who says, I'll be there for you, who is close? In response to that question, when he says to you, what do you want me to do for you? And you can tell him anything. You can tell him everything. So here's what we're going to do. If you're willing and able, I want to invite you to close your eyes. It's nothing magical. It just helps us to not get distracted. And to the best of your ability in your imagination, I want you to imagine that God, that Jesus is saying, what do you want me to do for you? And in just a minute or two of stillness, you can tell him, I'm going to tell him. And let's talk to the God who says, I'll be there for you. Jesus, I give you thanks that you are not distant, disinterested, distracted, but you are attentive to what we need. And you even ask us, what do you want? That you would even consider that we can speak from a place of desire. And Jesus, I'm asking today that for all of us, wherever we're at in our life, in our faith journey, that we may have a bit more confidence that when you say, I'll be there for you, that you mean it, that it's true, and that no matter how crazy and difficult life gets, that we can stand on the truth that you are good and faithful and loving and present. Amen. We're going to take a moment to sing a song that comes full circle of this series called I'll Be There For You. It's a song that says, draw me close to you. And it's about saying, God, I recognize if this is where you're at, that that's the most important thing, is to have a relationship with you. And you may not be there, and that's okay. May it inspire you and encourage you. So if you're willing and able, do you want to stand? And Dan and the team are going to lead us as we sing this song to close. Thank you.